Hello, and welcome to something I really wasn't expecting to record so soon, but there has been a huge amount of response. So, in consultation with my fluffy research assistant, who decided he wanted to say hello, I'm responding to all the questions. And I'm going to do it first by showing you some of the designs which have come through from your suggestions and some of the things I've looked at in that respect. And then, hello. I'm not sure if you can see me, but I can't see the screen because of someone's head. And then I'm going to answer the questions, as long as I can see the questions. Have you spotted a squirrel? Let's get this out of the way, so if you go flying off, you yes, those parts aren't attached, Ravi. Right then, let's look at the design, shall we? So, we are now looking at one of the designs which came through, which is basically, well, wouldn't the Royal Navy... And remember, please do remember that I am using the 14-inch gun as a stand-in for the 13.5-inch gun, because the 13.5-inch is not one of the designs that's available on this program. That's no discrimination against them. If they had every single type of gun ever that was ever devised for battleship guns, they would have probably be programming them from now till Kingdom Come. So, the 14 inches are standing in for the 13.5-inch in this scenario. That just because it's using a Vickers treble turret design doesn't mean it necessarily has the Vickers 14-inch gun in it. Because I'm fairly certain that you could fit a 13.5-inch gun in a 14-inch designed turret. Now, this one, as you can see, pretty much the Orion design. A couple of modifications, but what she does have is she has treble turrets instead of the instead of the one layer of turrets. Interestingly enough, in all the exercises I've done with them since I've had this design set up, it has resulted in me running out of shells for the twin turrets before I do for the treble turrets. Not sure why, but a cute looking ship. This, of course, is High Hibernia. And whenever you come in here, it doesn't like some of the parts because it just goes, no, you shouldn't be doing this. This is too early for this sort of idea. You go, but I like it. And have to sort of redesign it. That's fine. Now, I think this is still my preferred option. And I have a reason for this, which I'll be explaining a lot in the videos, I think. But anyway. Now let's consider King Jupiter. King Jupiter is, well, quite a lot of people have come back to me and gone, actually, this is what they would do. And this is definitely the conservative approach. And it produces a very, very nice design. If you can hear someone eating in the background, that's not me. That's a fluffy research assistant going, I want biscuits. I drove off a squirrel. It is a very conventional design. It's also a gorgeous design. As you notice, I have taken the liberty of putting my treble 4-inch guns on the back here. And frankly, this ship would have been beautiful in any scenario. And finally, the main question that comes up is, what would have happened to the Queen Elizabeth class if they had a triple 15-inch gun? And this is my version of the Queen Elizabeth class for you. Yes, soak it in. Imagine this beauty coming after you. Imagine HMS Warspite with 50% more firepower. Yeah, that is gorgeous. It is gorgeous. And that's the thing. It is a very nice option and a very nice thing to consider. It's also quite a practical thing to consider. And I'm allowed one glass of iron brew today because I've been drinking so much. And I've saved it for when recording this video. So hopefully I get through this video in one take. I do think about my sugar intake. Not having any chocolate today, and just having this one glass of iron brew. Which is fairly good. Just in case there's any dentists watching. So, before people ask where the fluffy research assistant is, he is sitting right next to me. Going, hello. Now, if I go through the comments, and I have to admit there are new comments coming in at all time. For starters, new IKB4472 has asked, can you get a permission to show us some of the photos somehow? I have asked permission. There is no way of it being granted. There is no likelihood of that photo being granted permission for me to display it at any point. So I have to try and track down where the person got the photo from. This is not unusual. I've dealt with this in the past. I've had pictures of ships. I'm not other ships. I'm not able to say a show. I've had pictures of people. Admiral Henderson, for example, who I was quite, open about. I had pictures of him that people had given to me very kindly, but I was never allowed to use them, and I wasn't allowed to show them, or wasn't allowed to, spread them around. So this is the life you sometimes live as a historian. People have their personal records, and they sometimes don't want to share them, or sometimes they have been the records of another historian, and their estate don't want to share them. Either way, it's fine. I'm not even sure if the person who showed it to me is supposed to have showed it to me. All I know is that they did. And that started off a very, very interesting pursuit. Knight 6A31, you commented about, was about HMS Hood's demise. And talking about the mighty jingles. Talking about the design mindset that created the Admiral class. And that is a pretty interesting idea and something to discuss and think about, but I don't think it's relevant to this one. However, let's go back to the first comments. Starting with William Cox, a Nelrod. Interesting. Yes. It was interesting. And there's a reason why I went with the Nelrod design. I know we like to think of it as something which comes up later. I know what you want, you big thing. But it's not. It's something which the Royal Navy have been considering for a while, because they are obsessed with having 6 forward-firing guns. For example, the battle which made Tegethoff famous as an admiral, and of course seemed to show the viability of a steam ram, involved forward-firing guns, and this is why I arranged them as I did. The more guns you can have firing forward, the better it goes. The better it is. It's the idea. That's one of the reasons why. Well, how do I put this? There are 2 reasons why Dreadnought has the shape she does. One is because Jackie Fisher is obsessed with 6 guns firing forward, and the other is that if he had been able to get super firing, he'd probably gone for 8 guns firing forward, because that would have made sense to him. Now, let's see. I won't pronounce your name because my little cousins watch the channel. Red October, though, is free this month on YouTube. Cool. I'm not sure about the comment about poor Alec Baldwin. Having done some stuff around sets, in my experience, They are incredibly complicated places with a lot of moving parts. The only places more complicated I've been and seen are shipyards when they're actually building ships. Not when they're cleaned up for the public to come and visit or the press to be going around and all the floor is nice and clean and tidy and everything looks good. I'm talking about the real shipyard. And always remember, what you see in front of the camera is not necessarily what's going on behind the camera. Yickers, thank you, Dr. Clarke. Thank you. Right. Then we have some lovely comments coming from Martin Peacock. Hello, Martin. Thank you for commenting. So, some thoughts. This could well be a long post. Well, I'm glad it's a long post. I like long posts. But I've got questions and queries. Please correct it. Do correct if I'm wrong. On shell weights, I am sure the British Heavy 13.5-inch shell was a £14,000 shell in the KGVs and Iron Dukes. This is basically the same weight as the American 14-inch shell in real life. No real difference then, and less of a logistical problem, if anything. Prevents sending the heavy 13.5-inch shells to the Orions and Lions. For those reading this and not aware, the Orions and Lions of 1909 fired a 1,250-pound shell, the same weight as the older British 13.5-inch guns. For later ships, a heavier shell was specified, perhaps up to £1,500. Ultimately, £1,400 was chosen. On the Admiralty adopting this sort of design or triple turrets in general, I'm increasingly coming around to the idea that many of the Admiralty board were not just conservative, but also technologically ignorant and were unable to fully understand the ramifications of the decisions they were making. That may be a bit harsh, but I think there is some truth present. Why 24 knots? Once you're going at that speed, moving on to 25 knots and matching the speed of Invincibles isn't a massive leap. Also, for the RN at the time, what do you gain at 24 knots? You could make the ships even smaller or better protected at 21 knots. Alternatively, at 25 knots, you gain a little bit more tactical flexibility. Above 21 knots, 25 is the lowest I can see the RN accepting. It was the design speed of the CE Queen Elizabeth for a reason. Now, I actually answer that point and I'll get into it in my response. Now on to the questions. Question 1. I'm sure I have read in one of Freeman's books that the Vickers, at least, were constantly trying to sell the Admiralty on a triple turret in the period in question. I believe it was in the British battleship 1906 1946. I could be wrong, though, and as I need to be up for work in less than 5 hours, thank you for commenting at the time morning it went out, and I do apologise again for the time morning it went out. It wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to go out at 1100 hours today. I don't know. I won't check right now. Either way, it stands to reason if Vickers were trying to sell something, then they at least have plans available for it. Moving from plans to an actual working example prototype as a sales tool isn't a massive leap. At the end of the day, the only way to find out the design is good in this period is to actually build it anyway. True. Question 2. On the design of the ship, I think my comments on the Admiralty board should leave you unsurprised, in my opinion, that something this radical was a non-starter. If a triple turret was being chosen, I would expect an AQ wide turret layout to spread the risk of a single hit taking out multiple turrets. On the design itself, I think your dimensions are a little off. The ship needs to be bigger. I'm willing to accept your judgment on this as you have more technical expertise. I think I'm fairly firm ground, however. Allow me to expand a bit. I think the ship was to be beamier and longer. Firstly, the triple turret is obviously wider and will have a wider bubba. Additionally, the ammo storage is going to be larger for each turret. They have an extra gun after all. To avoid stretching the design too much, some additional width is required. They will need to account for ship's overall width. Right, if you're going after the squirrel again, you're going down, because I have Iron Brood there I don't wish to see go flying over the floor. Oh, yes. No, you feel you chased off the squirrel. Now, to avoid stretching design too much, that will need to be accounted for in the ship's overall width to keep the shell and powder rooms at a safe distance from the ship's sides. Agreed, but also one of the things that affects width, and one of the reasons why this design works quite so well, and again, one of Nelson's and Rodney Melrod's, is that you can keep the engines one end of the ship and the ammunition the other end of the ship. And you therefore don't have to have as many repeats of the layering and protection and thermal protection you have between the ammunition storage and the engines. In fact, in this design, you pretty much have engines stern and back, guns front. And you can almost move facilities around to keep them in the center of the ship so that you have a natural cooling off space between the two. You also feel you have historical support here. The King George V's had a beam of 27.2 meters, or 89 foot 1 inches, whilst the Iron Dukes had a beam of 27.4 meters, or 90 foot. Both of those round to 27 meters. And I was doing in rounded figures because there are variations on the design you might want to pick. Honestly, my larger designs and 25 knot came in at 28 meters. So I was looking at the 25 knot and 24 knot. And the reason I went with the 24 knot was it was 3 knots over the 21, which was the same jump as they had for the 18 knots, from the pre-dreadnoughts to the dreadnoughts. Now, you go on further to a certain point that the American ships are somewhat girthier than British ships, but even so, I can't see putting a triple turret in essentially the same place as a twin, having no impact on the beam of a ship. It does depend on layout, and you can achieve something with the layout here. Now, Nell rods are technically 32 meters. And the largest design of this does go up to about 30 meters in beam. And the largest design is possibly my favorite. The largest design which I could produce based on this triple design can clock in at 28 knots. And it's beautiful. And it uses the same horsepower as the Queen Elizabeth's. Now, you go further that... now, if I'm correct on this, the ship's power is likely too low. The length to beam will mean that ships either need a fair bit more length or a lot more power to reach the design speed. Either option adds the cost and likely eats the money saved on building ships 3 triples rather than 5 twins. Going for a second comment, as I apparently can't get a 91. I should point out that one of the great things about Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts is it gives you the power ratio of your ship. It doesn't necessarily give you the lengths. You have to work that out. And I tend to work mine out by... UAD might not like me admitting this. I tend to print screen and print out, and then using the turrets for scale, work out the length of my ship. And play around with that. But they do tell you the horsepower we need. Now, you then go further with the second comment. This part of the answer to question 2 is cut short, so I could go on for longer. The ships are going to be coal-fired, that is a guarantee. I was thinking semi-oil, actually, myself, rather than coal, because I think they were heading for that at this point. There was certainly an argument over oil. Now, I'm going to leave out a bit about the keys were coal until Churchill ordered, because you and I have already had the discussion in the comments to that, and I've basically gone, yeah, Churchill gets involved in that, but not really involved in that. The KGB and AGVs and Iron Dukes each had 18 boilers for 21 knots. Yes, and amazingly, 27,000 shaft horsepower. And then you have the Queen Elizabeths, which have 24 boilers, of course, oil-powered, and get 70,000 shaft horsepower. So the boiler numbers go up by a third, but the horsepower trebles pretty much. Jaws next to me. Hello. If the design is kept to... that means your 11 ships will need 308 boilers to power them at least. Okay, so you're saying, being generous, your ships will probably need 28 boilers, though I feel 30 is more likely. Why? Again, Queen Elizabeth's 24. You're presuming it has to go coal oil fired. They're getting semi-oil. I'm thinking they could well go for oil fired for this design. And I have a reason for that. It is basically if the treble turret is adopted, because as you yourself said, the Admiralty is naturally conservative. So if it's a treble turret that's adopted, then my view is that the people who are going to be advocating that are going to be Fisher and Jellicoe. And if they're winning the treble turret battle, they're probably going to win the oil battle, because that's even less of a leap. That means your 11 ships will need 308 boilers to power them at least. That does not compare well to 144 boilers needed for the OTR ships, and adds to an increased cost and likely limits numbers. Honestly, boilers are easier to manufacture than turrets. They're not easy to manufacture, but they're a lot easier to manufacture than turrets. And there are a lot more yards producing boilers and good quality boilers in Britain. So, honestly, boilers are not going to be the big problem. Although I can see where you're coming from that. The design is kept to 21 knots. I quite like it. I don't feel 24 knots adds enough to justify the likely extra cost. 25 plus knots, though, that is different. Then you are into the fast battery territory, though I'm not sure if it's justified even then. Speed is useless if the ships are still tied to the slower 13.5-inch and 12-inch gun ships. As a fleet with the QEs, then okay, but if you're changing this much, then at least make the QEs make the design speed. Probably they would, though. Question 3. How do they change things? The extra speed is nice only if the ships can use it. As part of a fleet with slower dreadnoughts, it's pointless. If the ships can make use of the speed, though, I think it is more of a strategic rather than a tactical advantage. I still think Jellicoe turns away. That was a pre-war decision, and my opinion, the correct one. There is a longer conversation to be had here about the tactical maturity of the Grand Fleet in the early years of World War I. In 1916, said at Jutland, I don't think you can do much more than Jellicoe did, no matter the ships he has available. What's an interesting and thought-provoking video? As I'm sure you have gathered from my small comment, I really could sit and talk for hours about this properly. Ultimately, I feel that if anything like this were tried, the compromise required to get the Admiralty Board's approval will be enough to neuter the design, enough to leave the resulting ships a little disappointing, like the Queen Elizabeth were. It's an interesting idea. And the reason I've put one design up on here, which, as you know, is listed, it's the stats for the 24-knot ship. But I did mention during the video I've tested out a range of ships and a range of sizes. And this was the smallest with a speed advantage, as far as I felt. I could make it. It still has an armor advantage. This is the thing. This design, put in this design formation, it still has an armor advantage because of the various refinements on the shaping. It also isn't as radical as it necessarily might seem. As said, if it's being taught as a potential to the constructors course in 1907, which is what the notes, and I said, I've got this notes, these are notes from my dad, so I don't know 100%. This is information, as I said to you, I've got little tidbits, sprinklings of information, which might mean nothing. As I've been honest about this the whole way through, they might mean nothing. They're going to mean a lot of research to try and actually add some meat to their bones. But it's interesting. It's interesting. And I think it could be very interesting in terms of what comes about. The thing is really is the triple turret, and it's how do they react to that. And it's how they react to having a triple turret which works, and if they decide to implement it, and the changes it makes. I think it has some big changes. Now, as you've seen already from my designs earlier, my theory is that if you get triple turrets, then you get a Queen Elizabeth class that can do 25, 20, maybe you get them all bumped up to 25 knots. I would point out in my response, I'll just quickly read out my comment response, but I won't go into the full conversation we have. Well, the only points I make is that if I went with 27 meters, because honestly I was rounding, that's true, I was, and I was doing it, as I said, using the turrets to work out the distances, because they give you the power, and they give you all sorts of stats which allow you to work it out once you feed in, but I was also using that to analyze and work out the length. Which I felt most likely fit. The 25 knots came in at 28 meters, which is still svelte compared to the Nelson's 32.3 meters. Speaking of which, they were powered by 45,000 shaft horsepower and got to 23 knots. So I'm very comfortable with the 50,000 shaft horsepower and getting to 24, 25 knots. I'm very comfortable with that because the Nelsons are actually bigger and fatter. But they have a similar proportional ratio. I can see where you're coming from with the Admiralty. They're very conscious that if they make a mistake, they will be in a world of trouble, which I think why they do a no more than 2 changes per evolution. It's why the Orions weren't oil-powered. They decided that the new guns and the weapon layout was enough. This is why I see this as taking place in the KGVs, i.e. so it's new turrets and oil-powered. As for was the most likely, despite showing video of the 21 knot design and images of the 27 knot design. Simple. The RN had originally gone for a jump of 3 knots from pre-dreadnought to dreadnought, which dreadnought. Whilst I see your argument for 25 knots, that was actually a step down. They were aiming for 28 knots and settled in the Queen Elizabeth's case. They were aiming to try and get it to the lower speed levels of the older battle cruisers. That's what they were trying to jam up to. And that would have made Queen Elizabeth the real first true fast battleships. Because in my view, if it can't do 28 knots, it ain't a fast battleship. It might be a super dreadnought, but it ain't a fast battleship unless it can do 28 knots plus. But that's me. 24 knots would be the conservative speed upgrade. That's what I was doing it for. I was looking at the conservative speed upgrade, and I think you could get there. I think you could get there with semi-oil. I think you could get there with coal-fired if you really wanted to, if you bumped up the boilers. Not quite as many as you're suggesting, but yes, I can understand it, Martin. But I think you could get it there, and I think with oil-fired, you could get it there easily. Certainly, most of the designs I've picked I've been putting together and talking about today have been semi-oiled. If you look back at the video I showed earlier, they were all semi-oil. The stats given for this was oil-powered was the lighter one. That was lighter than the coal-powered, so it was allowing me to make it the lightest of the lot. And then we get into the whole joy of the various people in the various positions. All right, William Cox, feel free to post outside the usual focus. Thank you, I will do. Paul Beswick, wouldn't that result more likely with a QE class with treble 13.5s? The 1909 will put it earlier, and I think whatever happens, this is from Paul Beswick, and my response to Paul Beswick, I think whatever happens, the Queens will end up with 15-inch guns, just maybe 12 rather than 8. So we can all ponder, as you saw my design earlier, HMS Warspite with a 50% firepower boost. Also, with the increased beam for such weapons requiring more length, they could well accommodate some more boilers or might even go small tubed, meaning they could get 28 knots, 12, 15-inch gun battleships. We can all think about the impact that would have on the post-war treaties. It would probably make battleships bigger, but also, come on. And I can, in my view, the interesting thing then becomes the R class, and I think if anything, they could. It would depend if they have gone for a Nelrod style design for the KGVs or the other classes before the Queen Elizabeth, and then they do the Queen Elizabeth with the conventional design with the 4 trebles. I think they could refer to this design with the treble 15s for the for the R class, which could have an interesting impact on them. You are just blackmailing me now, aren't you? Yes. It would be interesting. It's a whole different concept once you get into trebles. And it also does have long-term consequences as well. If you start off trebles this area, if you have this many ships with trebles, do you go quadruples for the King George V's in World War II, or do you go for treble 16s? Because treble turrets are what you have all the detail, you have all the experience of operating. Paul Beswick, if the RN is standardized on triple turrets on its capital ships coming out of World War I, the implications for other navies are immense. Yes, they are. But let's also think about what 12, 15-inch guns on HMS Warspite does to pretty much anything in the Mediterranean. Angie Reynolds has said the RN adopting triple turrets in World War II probably wouldn't do all that much. The Germans might try to stick more guns on the Bayern class. I presume you mean World War I. But the Austrians, Italians, and Russians are already working on ships with triple turrets, and the Americans soon follow. Japan was given the option, but turned it down. I really can't see triple turrets alone changing too much more outside the RN over the long term. On the other hand, if the QEs are even faster than in real life, they'll probably have huge impacts on naval design going forward. For one thing, the entire USN stand line would be drastically obsolete after only a pair of ships. 28 knot, 12, 15-inch guns. You have nothing that can match that. And then if they drop the turret but still maintain the speed for the R class, and they go, right then, oh, you're going to be 9 15-inch guns but 28 knots. well, that suddenly gives the RN a very, very fast battle line. And that's before we consider the impacts on potentially on battle cruisers. We could end up with a two turret, a three gun turret, so six 15-inch gun, renown class, two turrets forward, and the rest put under speed. God knows what speed they'd achieve. Mitchell Oates, Andrew Reynolds. There were USN admirals already saying the standards were obsolete when the Queens hit the water, even more so when they learned about Hood. In 1914, they were already calling for a new battleship design, over 35,000 tons and 10 16-inch guns in 5 twins. But the SecNav told them that they had to stick to the same design for budget reasons, and we got New Mexico's instead. Ouch. But New Mexico's are nice looking ships in many respects. If the American newspapers believed, in 1907, were very concerned the Brits were thinking of building super-duper 30,000-ton dreadnoughts. Lewis Nixon, who knew something about building warships, imagined a 30,000-ton, 23-knot battleship with 6 triple turrets, 12 forward-firing guns. Ooh! Andrew Reynolds, if it was me, I'd take 4 triple turrets and sink the rest into extra speed. Andrew Reynolds, I think you just saw my Queen Elizabeth design. Gina Hahn, Lewis Nixon proposed a gas-fired rather than coal-burning ships. Whoosh! That would have been interesting. Evan McKinney, hello. When was the concept of using bow wave as a deflector field for torpedoes considered? Relative to the introduction of the gyroscope and the pendulum, obviously those weren't designed to handle sudden shocks, Buffett's forces, but they would help. Early torpedoes would clearly have problems, but I'm not sure about the later ones. Anyone in the RN had the guts to try this with a practice torpedo? Practice torpedoes, I'm not sure about. I do know that in World War I and World War II, destroyers tried this for real. And some of them even survived. In fact, the vast majority of them survived. So, Mitchell Oates, hello. The Clarke, I did a little checking in my old copy of Conway's 1906-26. Cool. Given that Vickers had some success with the IJN regarding their 14-inch guns, I checked the notes for various IJN ships, found the following, except notes for the Fuso class. Relatively great length was needed to accommodate 6 twin 14-inch turrets. This is because it always sounds strange when you go, right, so what's the caliber difference? Well, the caliber difference between if you're doing a 40... let's say it's a 40 caliber for maths. No one actually has a 40, but let's say, for my maths sake, let's say 40. You have a 12-inch gun, that's 40 feet long. If you have a 14-inch gun, and that's times 40, well, hang on a bit. That's going to be 40 feet, plus another 80 inches. And 80 inches is another 6 foot, and, well, 6 2/3 feet, really. So it comes up to dang on near 47 foot. That's a big difference. And once you're talking about bigger caliber, it's something which only magnifies the bigger you go. So once you're into the 45s, the 50s, it just gets gross. If relatively great, so the choice of twins must have been deliberate. If that was indeed a triple 14-inch turret in your mystery photo, it may have been an option Vickers offered the Japanese. Believe it or not, someone else, when I was talking about this first off, when I first got them Baruti Christmas, was bringing up the same idea. In regards to Fuso and possibly Congo class ships, or that it was a triple 12-inch turret offered as an option for the initially planned 12-inch armament on the Congos. You see, I'm fairly sure it's a 14-inch, and yes, as I said, it says Vickers, and 1909 is the writing on the back. But it was sent to me, and the person who sent to me gave me a little bit of notes, and in those, it's described as a 14-inch turret, because apparently those are the notes which came from the other person as well. So the photo has that, and the person, who I would trust, if any historian was going to know, it's 40, and it looks like a 14-inch gun to me. This might sound strange again, but comparing the barrels and the shaping, it looks more like the 14-inch than the 12-inch. If it was a 12-inch, it's a very, very heavily rebuilt for a 12-inch. So I think it's the 14-inch. Yeah. I'd say that one, let's put it this way: I'm more certain of the 14-inch than I am of the year. The year is a little bit is a piece of writing on there. I'm more certain of the 14-inch. Michael Renane, hello. Always amazing the quantity and quality of variety of content you produce, Dr. Clarke. As you point out, this is tiny and difficult. Your channel has been a blessing for me. Thanks so much. Thank you. That's what it is. Not everyone's lucky enough to have a big fluffy research assistant who keeps trying to blackmail me for biscuits. Or, this is one of the reasons why I love my him. I live with my family at the moment. It might have been sensible to move home to save up money to buy my own place. Yes, but it does mean during COVID and all this stuff I've had company, which has been good. They can get on my nerves, but it's still better than being alone, and therefore it's a blessing. And I can't do that. I can't really, because of the shielding. Nothing's shared that blessing that way. So I'm trying to help the only way I can, which is record these videos and put them out there. And well, hope people buy my book and enjoy reading that. I know at least one person is incredibly excited at the moment because they got a copy of my book today, and they immediately asked me if I can sign it for them. It was my aunt. If you haven't already noticed don't know what my book is, Destroyers, which is kind of probably could have been more interesting because they're going, Alex, you're talking about battleships and battleship guns, and you've done a book on destroyers, and your PhD was on aircraft carriers. Pick a lane, man. Pick a lane. I'm going, I like ship design. That is my lane. Frank Spardo, hello. Let's see, what were the IJ and USA and Italy doing with battleships at this time in 1999? Does that affect your idea? Andrew Reynolds answered this pretty darn well. As best I can tell, the Italians are working on their first of two classes of 12-inch gun battleships, which already introduced triple turrets. The French have finally been convinced to begin designing their first dreadnought. The Russians are starting on the Gunga class. Please go look at my series, the 1905 to 1914 dreadnought series, which I do mention everyone's dreadnoughts which are being designed that year. And you can find a 1909 video is pretty darn cool, even if I do say so myself. But Andrew Reynolds has summed this up nicely. The Russians are starting on the Gunga class, the Americans are starting the York class design, and the IJN are working on the Kongu and then the Fuzu classes, which Vickers did unsuccessfully offer to design with triple turrets. The Austrians, Italians, and Russians were already working on triple turret designs at this point. I expect, like Clarke, you sound like one, but I don't think it'll be tremendous to change the small navies unless the IJN reason. True, but I think it might have an impact on the Germans. I think that's the thing. The Kaiserlich Marine will have an impact of having the RN coming with a triple turret. Especially if the RN had decided to introduce a treble whammy of bigger gun and treble turrets in the Orions, i.e., if they'd done that, and let's say they went with that design which you saw, the possibly the first design, which had sort of 13 guns, that would have annihilated the Germans. It would have just because if you consider efficiency-wise, their equivalent dreadnoughts had 6 turrets and had an 8-gun broadside from 4 of those turrets. That's all they could fire per each side. And then the British would go, well, yeah, we have 5 turrets and we have a 13-gun broadside. So we're 50%, more than 50% greater broadside than you have. It's just not good for them. David Thompson, another highly thought-provoking episode, Doctor. I think the triple gun was in the works, as you believe, although I'm not sure about all the all-forward arrangement. I think with the triple, they would elect a 2-4-1R for a 3 times triple. So that design, that's a very, very lovely and very capable design. I've taken it out and played with it on the exercises they can offer. And I can tell you, my 8 of those had fun with their 5 German counterparts. I decided to give the Germans a little bit of a boost in numbers than they would have had in reality. It was quite successful. Smattering quick-firing secondaries and turrets along the superstructure would allow for a more efficient hull form, hence more space for goodies needing less by push along. Imagine the Renown with proper armour for 13.5-inch guns with 3 triples instead of 3 twins. Hunting for information. May I suggest you look at the suppliers for Vickers as well, as the materials they were investigating could lead you to other rabbit holes to venture down. That's definitely what I'm going to looking for. And keep amazing work. Thank you for such tantalizing piece of the holidays. Take care. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching it. Thank you, Stafford. Incal didn't appreciate the fabrication turrets we progressed on spec in this era. Was an RN 15-inch triple also built when that was postulated? Well, that's another of the interesting idea I'm going to be hunting down. Oh, Mitchell Oates. Okay. A possible reason for the Royal Navy not going for triple 14-inch turrets, or triple turrets, period. Well, I do keep saying it would have been, I think they would have been 13.5-inch turrets, guns in the turrets, but it's the Vickers, and I think they're designing for 14. And the thing is, the 14 would fit a 13.5-inch. Well before World War, shell dispersion due to the blast effect from closely spaced guns. The RN had already been testing out that and working out ways around it. They looked into this one. Mainly for their secondary guns, but they were looking into it. Which is why you have the treble 4-inch mounts appearing during World War I. Suddenly, you know, the Royal Navy's got treble 4-inch mounts. The Royal Navy does like the idea of a treble turret. There is a reason the Town-class cruisers have treble turrets and all these other... The Royal Navy, it does like the idea of a treble turret. It's making it work and having the money and the funding and time to make it work. You have to be on me. It's 3 a.m. and I'm going from memory instead of incurring the wrath of others in the household by searching for our books at this hour. Thank you! I seem to remember reading or watching someplace that the RN had an actual specification for how far apart the guns and the turret should be spaced to prevent interference due to muzzle blast. Making a triple turret that was wide enough to keep the same distance between the 3 barrels, and therefore a substantially larger turret ring and below-deck insulation, along with a substantial increase in ship's beam, i.e. a larger, more expensive ship overall, would have to be weighed against opting for a more compact setup with reduced distance from between the barrels, which could result in overall loss of accuracy of range due to muzzle blast interference. Again, from memory, I believe it was in Mr. Friedman's history. Professor Friedman's. I'm not being rude or mean that in a nasty way. The only reason I'm correcting that is because he watches my channel and he always calls me doctor when we're whenever we've been on a thing, and this is a public place, so I'm calling him by his title. So that's me correcting myself, not you. Please note. History of USN Professor of Airship Design. When the USN started putting triple 14-inch turrets on the USN standards, they started encountering problems with poor shell dispersion due to the spacing of the barrels. The workaround they hit upon was to include a delay coil in the firing circuit, such that the guns in a single turret fired at slightly different times. Difference being on the order of less than a second if memory serves, which did end up improving shell dispersion. The RN might have ended up having similar problems and having to adapt similar solutions if they went for triple 14-inch turret during the period. I think they would have done, and I think they could have done quite happily. Peter Romson, it'd be interesting to see a video of you, Drakenfell, and Brother Munro discussing naval design with using UAD as a visual aid. That would be fun, and I would certainly love to be part of that video. Let's see if you can get it arranged. That's all I'm going to say. Carl Gasman, it's not just the jumping caliber from the pre-jets, 3s and 12s, and from the 12s to into triples, but also the distrust and superfiring turrets that made HMS Dreadnought the 5-2-12 ship as she was. I think, of course, but that would be an interesting butterfly. It would be. January explained, hello, I like the scenario of triple turrets for Jutland. Nevertheless, I would have gone for the Imperial High Seas Fleet with triple turrets, with an elevation of closer to 45 degrees to be able to shoot at longer distance. Given the fact of relatively poor deck armor combined with better optical devices of German production, you could even keep 2 turrets in front and 1 aft, waiting for the British larger triple turrets closing in. The effect would have been devastating enough, and you could have made them even faster as well as to keep a healthy distance. As always, well done. Kind regards, Jan Erik Smith, Commander, German Naval Reserve. A happy and better new year for all of us. Thank you, Commander Smith. I would add that don't count chickens till they're hatched on the triple turrets. I think if the British had gone triples, the Germans would have gone triples, but I think it would have taken them longer because they don't have the industry the British do. The British could have switched turret production. The British do have the infrastructure and the industry available to do that, and the funding for the Navy to do that. Most importantly, I don't think the Germans do at that point. Then there's a nice little discussion about whether I meant it to be 2 inches for the conning tower. Jan, you felt it should be 280 millimeters or something. No, I just don't like conning towers and think they're a waste of armor, like most of the Royal Navy in this period. The designers built the conning towers, and the admirals occasionally deign to use them to store their stuff. John Hargreaves, have you considered the archives at Baron Furnace Shipyard where I worked until 2019? The 14-inch guns, I think, were tested on Walney Island range. I think when I was looking through the museums next door to the shipyard, a triple turret design. I'm not sure on dates or the info, but it might be worth a call to the museum and BAE at Barrow to see if they can confirm that there are records that might be useful in research. Kind regards. That's exactly where I was thinking when I was talking about the archive for the range. It's the Baron Furnace Shipyard and and the archives up there. Could be interesting. I could end up having to have a phone call with BAE. John Hargreaves. Further, I think there was some reluctance to use the Vickers 14-inch gun, which one of your commenters I mentioned were being sold to IGN later. Kind of else. Yes, there were, but I think a turret which can take a 14-inch gun can probably take a 13.5-inch gun, and possibly actually achieve better movement of it. Because I think if you're designed to move around and get decent elevation with a 14-inch gun, a 13.5-inch gun isn't much less, but it's enough less, okay, in terms of weight and diameter, really, that you could get some more useful degrees of elevation out of it. John Hargreaves, was the reluctance of the RN due to the feeling that the 14-inch did not have a significant advantage over 13.5-inch? Yep. Would mean the RN for the triple would have to go with a Vickers gun, which the RN did not have the input or control as they did on the 13.5-inch gun. They wouldn't have had to go the triple because, as said, anything that can take the 14-inch can take the 13.5-inch. And Vickers are not the kind of company. Vickers are a very refreshing company in their history. If you have money and are prepared to give it to them, they will sell it to you. That's not necessarily the best thing you want for in terms of ethical arms sales, but they don't really care about that one. They just more, well, if you have the money, they will sell it to you. So that works for the Royal Navy. So this it reminds me of the issues with quadruple turrets. Was it worth having a broken quad versus a then functional triple or even doubles? So the conservatism is not unjust. Plus the argument that a more spacey twin 13.5-inch gun will be faster firing than the triples, already of your caliber. There's an argument for that. That said, EVA introductions would allow the older ships to be somewhat more versatile later on a forced maturity of some technologies. Though I don't recall this ever being done, it would allow a triple 14 to be upgunned to double 15s. I think a triple 13.5 could be upgunned to double 15s. A triple 14 could probably be upgunned to double 16s if you wanted, without too much issue. I could certainly see it being done if you really wanted to. Regarding the ship design, now I'm a huge fan of the all-4 design, but I'm not quite sure it'll be adapted quite so soon. I think a key development for it is the option of an all-or-nothing scheme. To be honest, the idea of a all-forward ships are all more interesting than earlier triples. It is an interesting idea, and remember, I have put in a turtleback arm scheme on all of them. All the designs have a turtleback arm scheme because that's the best that you're allowed at that period, and it looks good to me. Geoguy, you have lots of comments, but I'm going to go with your biggest one because that basically sums up all your points in one go. Nelson had its three gun turrets with all three guns correctly mounted together. They had to be raised and lowered together and fired in stagger patterns to avoid interference. Would it have been that big a problem in the pre-World War I era to create an independently mounted guns with a triple turret within a triple turret? With the Nelson type of turret design, wouldn't that increase the chance of all three guns and turret being knocked out at once, since they share the same machinery, rather than if they were individually sleeved with their own hydraulics and so forth, such as each gun having its own splintered protected compartment? It's the size of turret. If you want to build a massive turret, you can build it all with individual. But if you want to build a thinner, smaller turret that you can maybe have thicker armor on the outside of, and it still take up the same space on your sort of deck, you put it together, you combine it. You can also design in a level of redundancy by having secondary and auxiliary systems built in as well that can still move it even if stuff gets damaged. And ooh, there are some more comments. Hugo Armstrong seems to have drawn up more triple turrets design variations for possible export to Japan than Vickers did. Maybe many dating to 1907. So there could also be some more stuff going on there. This is a Vickers one. It would be really interesting if we find out that both Armstrong and Vickers did build treble turrets, and the Royal Navy didn't employ them. The Russians might have that information in their archives, as they were one time going to use Vickers 14-inch on the Borodino class, Ismail class, and those were to be triple mounts. Found this in nav weapons and McLaughlin's. Cool. Although visiting Russian archives could be interesting for me. I get on well with their navy, not necessarily with other branches of their government. But thank you. I hope you've enjoyed these videos. I hope you're enjoying what I've been discussing with you. And this is my comment response video. This is going to go out hopefully at 6 o'clock, so a normal time. And then tomorrow will be the normal lives. And if there are more comments on this one, on the previous one, then I might do another response video on Saturday. But mainly, this is sort of me trying to give you an idea of how I'm starting off and what I'm starting off looking at because of my next project. And yes, it is going to involve destroyers again, it is going to involve aircraft carriers, and it's going to involve battleships. And it's going to involve a lot of work. A lot of work. But it's going to be cathartic, I'm fairly sure. I had that phrase said to me in an interview about my book, and that's something else I want to sort of add. If you look around, I have been doing some interviews about these books, the book, and I will be sharing links to them, but there are some really cool people. I've been reading this stuff, and thank you. Thank you for all the kind comments, and thank you for the things going back. That reminds me, I have to send them some pictures. Take care of them. Thank you, and hope you're having a nice in-between period. That's what I call it.